for joining me today on Maple Leafs Man Advantage. And I am Hawkeye. And I'm going to look at today, the episode I'm going to do today. We're going to look at the 1968 NHL Amateur Draft. Who the Leafs drafted, who went number one, everything like that. And, perhaps if the Leafs made the correct selections with their choices in that draft. Now, this particular draft happened on June the 13th, 1968. And once again, it was held at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel in Montreal, Quebec. For the draft itself, though, the Leafs ended up only making one selection. They only drafted one guy. Um, I would definitely say it seems that the NHL teams may not be taking this draft as seriously as they should be, in my opinion, as this will certainly aid them in the future. Um, but one thing I do notice with this draft and the next particular draft, it will happen again, but it is the Montreal Canadiens who just happened to win the Stanley Cup the last time. Um, they're loading up with draft picks at this point, and their GM is Sam Pollock, and he certainly has been given a lot of credit in putting that team together. And my oh my, I think he deserves every ounce of that credit. He was well ahead of the time of other GMs in taking this seriously or trying to take advantage in the draft. And that he did. Very, very sure. Um, yeah, a very smart thing to do when others were not maybe taking it quite as seriously as they should have been. So, in this particular draft, the Montreal Canadiens happened to have the very first three draft picks. Crazy, as they had just won the Stanley Cup. Um, Now, if I'm not mistaken, this was because at the time Montreal was allowed to draft two French Canadian players above the picks that they already had. So they were definitely funneling the French players into Montreal, perhaps the best or the whoever Montreal thinks are the best into their system. So they also got the Montreal or the Oakland Seals, I'm sorry, their first round draft pick in a big trade that sent Norm Ferguson, Stan Fuller, Francois Lacombe, and Michel Jacques to Oakland. Coming back to Montreal was Wally Boyer, who had played with the Leafs, Alain Caron, Lyle Bradley, and this 19, as well as the 1970 first round draft pick and the 1968 first round draft pick. Wow. Big trade there for Montreal. Um, Absolutely. Now, personally, myself, with the Leafs, if I was running the team, I would be following suit of Montreal and seeing what I could do to trade some guys and get some draft picks in return. Now, with the number one pick in the 1968 draft, Montreal ended up drafting goaltender Michel Place. He was born right in Montreal on June the 1st, 1948. After he was drafted, he bounced through a few places, such as the Cleveland Barons in the AHL, the Jacksonville Rockets in the EHL, and the Kansas City Blues in the CHL before he played a game for the St. Louis Blues. After Montreal traded him to that team, ended up getting cash in return. So it looks like Michel Place was highly thought of, but he may not have really instantly shown his ability in the net as well to Montreal. Now, in saying that, Montreal had an extremely difficult goalie group to try and break. That also may have been extremely problematic for Place in trying to get to Montreal. Um, at the time, yeah, they had great goaltenders like Gump Worsley and Rogie Vachon. And I think Tony Esposito was there. Like we have excellent goaltenders playing in Montreal. All three of them Hall of Famers. So good luck. Good luck, dude, trying to break that up. So that absolutely had to have been a problem too. But in return, he was traded back to Montreal from St. Louis for cash again. So, it was kind of like, not really, but it was almost like traded for himself, kind of. And other than the Blues and the Habs, he played for the Kansas City Scouts, the Pittsburgh Penguins, Colorado Rockies, and the Quebec Nordiques. He did play on not a lot of so great teams. The Montreal Canadiens that he played for, that was by far the best team he played on. He played with them from 1972 through 74, so just a couple of seasons. But overall, Michel played 298 NHL games. He grabbed 22 wins, 53 ties, two shutouts, and an 881 save percentage with a 3.79 goals against average. Okay numbers. Certainly never really um, came up to the I was drafted number one status, if you will, but he did definitely carve out an NHL career in the 70s there, Michel Plas. Now for Toronto, they ended up with the number 10 pick in the first round. As I said earlier, they only made one selection. This was it. They ended up drafting defenseman Brad Selwood. He was also known as Regs. He was born in Leamington, Ontario, and he had played one season in the OHA for the Niagara Falls Flyers. He played 54 games there, scored 10 goals with 23 assists for 33 points and 75 penalty minutes, um, showing that he may have some offensive potential there in the OHA. Brad ended up playing 99 games for the Leafs with 6 goals and 27 assists for 33 points before he jumped over to the WHA to play with the New England Whalers. And he played with them for 7 seasons. In the WHA, he played 431 games with 42 goals, 143 assists for 185 points to go along with 556 penalty minutes. He even won the Abco Cup in 1973 with the Whalers. That was their Stanley Cup. A couple other former Leaf defensemen were there too, in Jim Dory and Rick Lee. He then came back to the NHL and played for the LA Kings for one season. And he played 63 games with 1 goal, 13 assists for 14 points, and he had 82 penalty minutes as well that season. Now, looking at who was also drafted around Selwood, he was the right guy. He was the right selection with this pick. After his playing days, he was an assistant coach with the LA Kings in 1982-83. He was also head coach for the London Knights in 1996-97 and the Oshawa Generals for 2 seasons, 2006 through 2008. So Brad got into coaching after his playing days. Now, just looking at my team coming up into this season, I'm not going to show you who would be on my team if I was GM of the Leafs or running the show. But in this draft, I would have traded a couple of guys from the Leafs away. Um, so I would have traded Tim Ecclestone and Wayne Carlton to the Blues for their number one and number two first and second round picks in this draft. I think I did that last year, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm sorry I'm going slowly. I'm like, didn't I already do that? Yes, I did. So for this draft, in making that trade, I would have the number 6 pick in this draft that originally would have went to St. Louis. With this pick, I would select left winger John Marks. In fact, he also played defense for a couple of seasons as well. So that's kind of definitely an added something good with this player. He can play defense as well if I need him to. Um, Over the course of his career, John played 657 games. He scored 112 goals, added 163 assists for 275 points. He scored 21 goals twice in his career in 1975-76 and 1978-79, both for the Chicago Blackhawks, who were the team that ended up drafting him as well. He also was a 1976 All Star as well. He spent his whole 10-year career in Chicago. After he played, John got into coaching. For example, he was an assistant coach in the University of North Dakota, where he played before starting his NHL career. So John got into coaching as well after his playing days. Now, in addition, with this trade, I would also have the number 16 pick in the second round that originally went to St. Louis as well. With this pick, I would select left winger for Bennett. He ended up playing 580 NHL games, scored 152 goals, adding 182 assists for 334 points. He scored 30 goals twice and had a career high 34 in 1975-76 for the Atlanta Flames. He also played for the Blues on a couple of occasions, and the Flames for a couple of occasions as well, and the New York Rangers. His father was Harvey Bennett, who played net for the Boston Bruins in 1944-45 as a teenager. He had 10 career wins and a 420 goals against average. He also had two brothers who played in the NHL, so very much an NHL family. There was Harvey Jr., who played 268 games, had 44 goals and 347 penalty minutes, and his brother Bill, who played 31 games, scoring 4 goals and 65 penalty minutes as well. Now, a couple other things I'll talk about here as well that happened right around when the amateur draft went on. The following day was the Intra-League Draft, and there were a lot of moves involving the Leafs. The Leafs lost Brian Conacher and Larry Hillman to the New York Rangers, as well as Dwayne Rupp. He went to the Minnesota North Stars. In turn, though, they did pick up Bill Sutherland from the Minnesota North Stars, right winger Larry Mickey from the Rangers, and left wing Gary Marsh from the Detroit Red Wings. Now, when looking at the list of the players, the Leafs lost an everyday left winger and two everyday defensemen. In return, Sutherland did score 20 goals the previous season for the Flyers, so that's a big plus. Um, and what's interesting is he was originally picked up by the North Stars, and then the Leafs picked him up off of Minnesota in that very same draft. He was 33 at the time, though, so he's not a young guy. He's definitely showing what he can do here. But for the following season, he would be 34 for a majority of that season. But he did end up playing some important minutes for the Leafs this season as a center. Now, Mickey had played 20 games in the NHL by this point, 19 for the Rangers, and grabbed 2 assists in the process. He would go on to play some important minutes in Toronto as a right winger this season as well. And finally, Marsh played 6 games for the Red Wings the previous season. He had 1 goal and 3 assists for four points. Not too bad. He only played 6 games. But Gary would only go on to play 1 game for the Leafs this season, and that was it for his NHL career. Now, in addition to that draft on that day, there was also the reverse draft, which was started in 1965. And what it was is teams in the AHL and the WHL could, in fact, draft players that were in the NHL and put them on their squad. Interesting. That would never happen now. Everything's set up differently, right? But there would not have been many players that were left unprotected for this draft. But there was a guy who was extremely important to the Leafs. He's getting pretty old though now. He was left unprotected, and that was Alan Stanley, the defenseman. He was picked up by the Philadelphia Flyers in this draft. Um, So yeah, Stanley, he was a Hall of Fame defenseman. He won 4 cups in Toronto, and I believe he's usually paired with Tim Horton. Real good combo on the back end there. Now, Stanley, he would play 1 season in Philadelphia. He was 42 years of age, getting up there, absolutely. He played in 64 games with 4 goals, 13 assists for 17 points. Um, this is kind of crazy because from the original 5 Leafs defensemen, the Leafs would have going into this draft, they would have Tim Horton, who is 38 years old, and Marcel Pronovost, who is also 38 years old. And way I see it, Stanley may have been left unprotected because they picked up Pierre Pilote. As I said in that particular video, I would not have made that trade. So in turn, maybe I would have left Stanley protected, but unfortunately, I am just gonna let him walk. I'll let him go to Philly where he went. So there you have it. So for the draft itself, even though the Leafs only made 1 selection, they did end up making the right selection, I think. Um, but there you have it. I think though that proof is in the pudding. Um, you need to do what the Montreal Canadiens are doing in working out deals and trades to pick up these draft picks to help yourself in the future to get a hold of some good players. I did that. I mean, I got rid of a couple of good players and I picked up some younger guys that maybe I can put into the lineup in the future. Um, so there you have it. So yeah, that was a 1968 NHL Amateur Draft. So there you have it. So if you like this video, don't be afraid to hit like or subscribe. I got lots of other videos here, primarily about the Toronto Maple Leafs, but that's not all. I'm talking hockey, talking the NHL, going through history, and looking at why the Leafs haven't won a cup since 1967, looking at things that they have done and perhaps things that they may not have, maybe shouldn't have done through the years that may have not worked out for them in the end. And if you want to comment on anything, you go ahead and do that as well. I love talking hockey. It's one of the things I love in life. So there you have it. But until next time, have yourself an excellent day.